Good afternoon and welcome to today's webinar, Maximum Impact, Bridging the Gap Between Technology and Culture. I'm Penny Horwood, Associate Editor at Computing. Workplace culture is pivotal to the successful adoption of technology, especially the AI-driven applications and processes that technology leaders are increasingly expected to deliver and use. The effectiveness of these tools depends largely on how they're viewed and utilised by employees. In today's hybrid work landscape, many organisations face challenges balancing technology, culture, and operational efficiency. They struggle to find and retain the right skills, and this is partly because it can be tricky to foster flexible and inclusive workplace cultures that adopt new technologies thoughtfully and positively and deliver the ROI that we're all looking for. Joining me today to examine this challenge and discuss some solutions are Carolina Almeida, Director of EMEA Professional Services at Salesforce, and Charlotte Graham, People and Change Lead at Ocado Retail. I'm going to hand over to them now to ask them to tell us a bit more about themselves. Carolina, would you like to start?
Thank you, Penny. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. I'm very excited to be here. I'm Carolina Almeida, as Penny mentioned. I lead the delivery team for professional services in EMEA for Slack as part of Salesforce. I've been with Slack for 5 years, and I've been in the industry for many more years than that, I would say. I've been in the UK for 12 years, and since then I've been in tech, especially professional services. So very excited to talk a little bit more what we've seen in the field with our customers and this kind of changes in how the successful ones, have been able to build that bridge. Thank you so much, and see you soon.
Thank you. Charlotte?
Hi everyone, my name's Charlotte Graham and I work at Ocado Retail as People and Change Lead. So I've been at Ocado for about 4 years, but prior to that I have worked on a number of different change programs in both New Zealand and in the UK. At Ocado, I started in the IT function where I sort of led on business focused IT initiatives, and then I transitioned over to the people team or the people function where I currently sit. And I continue to lead on change initiatives, but sort of more people-focused change initiatives. And from the culture side of things, I also look after engagement and internal comms. So my key focus is really our colleagues and ensuring that they are supported through the people side of change and they're kept engaged. And a lot of that work is through focusing on leadership and collaboration and just really ensuring that the right capabilities and behaviours are developed within a team or within an organisation. So this is a really exciting topic, and yeah, happy to be here today.
Fantastic. So we have tech and culture both represented. It's excellent. So before we get started, some housekeeping. I'd just like to highlight the Q&A box to our viewers, which you should be able to see on screen, which allows you to submit a question to myself and for Carolina and Charlotte. So thank you to those of you who've already submitted questions. That's great. And we'll hopefully get round to answering some of those questions during the webinar or towards the end. So if you haven't already, please do get your questions in. So to begin, Carolina, I'm going to start by asking you, you have worked with lots of businesses like Ocado Retail. How have you observed that digital transformation and business process change is best managed whilst keeping that culture of openness and innovation live and kicking?
That's a great question. That's one that actually I not only get from customers, but I try to advise customers towards the right direction. I think to where we see the most successful cases where they see digital transformation not only as a technical component or a technical task force, but especially where it's very much aligned and grounded on the company's values, culture, and on the people. It's making sure that this digital transformation makes sense in the wider company strategy and vision, and would the users or the people, the employees know what they're supposed to be doing about it. What's the change that is happening on their own side, so that they understand what the behaviors that are supposed to be displaying as part of this new way of working. Uh, we see sometimes, though, that that's not something that is prioritized. And that's where there is a question, why is it not working? Because the technology in itself is very important, but without the people using the technology, it becomes empty. So, yeah, that would be my first observation, I would say.
I like the point about technology becoming empty without the culture or framing. Charlotte, did you? And presumably that's where you can really give us your point of view as well.
Thank you, Carolina. Your answer is sort of music to my ears because all of those things are so important. I think for us as an organisation, it actually helps that we're an online retailer because by our very nature, we're sort of focused on technology and innovation to not only meet our customer needs but also our colleagues' expectations, which are continuously changing. And so we have to kind of continuously change ourselves to keep up with them. And our culture also needs to sort of be one in which continuous change and innovation is celebrated, and that really thrives. So that when we're bringing in these technology initiatives, they're sort of readily accepted by and adopted by colleagues. So specifically for me, I suppose, in the work that I do leading change, but also within our organisation, there's two key things that really help to keep culture alive and thriving through these big sort of transformations. And they're pretty much exactly what you've already said, Caroline. But the first is having a real clear sense of purpose, and the second is being really values-led. And neither of these things are sort of like new concepts by any means, but I think that organizations often struggle with the articulation of the purpose and the benefit of digital transformation, and connecting that to both organizational goals, but also to the individuals and the people within those organizations as well. So when I look at the many different sort of changes that we've undergone within my current business, but in other businesses that I've worked in as well, that having that shared sense of purpose is really key to keeping the culture alive. It's what we use to anchor like the work that we do, and to help drive the decisions that we make. And then underpinning that is the values, which are really key in driving the behaviours and the capabilities that we need to see as an organisation to continuously innovate and to kind of keep that culture alive. So yeah, very aligned there.
Brilliant. So purpose and benefit I've written down, which is speaking of purpose and benefit, I'm going to come to AI because of course we're 6 minutes in, and we had to go there sooner or later. So as obviously generative AI technology in particular, but also what automation more broadly, becomes more embedded in business process, how is that impacting the culture, the wider culture in organizations, and how is that affecting sort of really workplace culture as a whole? Caroline, do you want to lead there?
Let's start. I mean, you're right. There is no way we can talk about technology nowadays without talking about AI. And what we're seeing across the board with our customers is that some level of, I'd say at least discussion is happening, which is a good thing. But a lot of them are just trying. They're buying or acquiring or at least trialing a lot of different technologies as different AIs, let's say like this, but without a clear purpose. I think a lot of companies are still trying to find their footing on what AI means for them. Some of them are more in the conservative side of the spectrum, from perhaps for regulatory reasons or for trying to be more conservative from what they trying to understand where things are going with AI. Some of them are much more trying out different things, giving even the liberty for their employees to use however they prefer, so that they can understand where the AI is taking them. I do believe that there is always a balance somewhere in the middle, and the AI change is something that every company has to start thinking about, has to start understanding how that means for their context, but also be very mindful of what is the purpose of AI for them. What AI means for them is what's the objective they're trying to achieve with it. And then bringing the different technologies, because there's so much going on. There's a lot of noise in the market, but it's about being purposeful, because people are going to use what they understand how to use it. We see some people are being more those that are the adventurers or first adopters. They're going to be a small group in every company, unless the company hires for those first adopters. But it's about people understanding what they're supposed to use AI for, and then they're going to start adopting and using it in their day-to-day. My whole discussion about AI internally is that we have it like AI as several features in our platform. Is like people have to understand how that can help them, right? What's in it for them. And therefore, they're going to start trying to engage in their routine. Okay, perhaps every morning I'm using recap, or I'm going to start to use summarization in specific situations, or I'm going to start, there are so many different things, using notes and huddles and so on. But what is that for? How can I use it? How can I embed it in my day to day? And there's also another point of change that I should say, it should be remiss if I would miss it, is um, the fear of the AI is going to happen in the workforce. Um, I think the
Do you mean
companies
the
have,
fears, do you mean the fears of employees?
correct, correct.
Right.
Of what does mean for my job? Am I going to still be relevant for the future? And each company has to find their own narrative, of course, on how to make sure this is clear and it's communicated to their employees, but it's about making them understand how that's going to help them even become more relevant considering their work or is expected out of them. We see some cases that companies are saying, if we are automating or we're making AI take over some of the more simple parts of your tasks, of your jobs to be done, let's say, perhaps you can go to the more complex, more interesting, more value added kind of jobs that we need a human to be able to articulate and to be able to execute. Now, that's something that I would not advise companies to steer away from. It's a conversation that needs to happen at some point. If you are going into get onboarded into the AI journey, it is a conversation or it is a communication that should happen.
Yeah, because that fear amongst employees is sometimes driven, I understand, by the perception that the leadership of an organization is sort of sort of effectively pushing it on them before they feel ready. And you're breeding suspicion on sort of both sides, which is not going to help anyone. I mean, Charlotte, what's been your experience of this, of managing this kind of change at Ocado Retail?
I think like most organisations, we're still sort of like in the early stages, and even for me, I'm on my own personal journey with AI, right? So you're just like kind of, how do I use it, and how am I going to kind of adopt it in my ways of working? And it can be quite a scaring and daunting thing when you're so used to working in one way, and then all of a sudden there's like all this new technology, and it's like changing so consistently. But I think picking up on what you said, Carolina, again, like this is really all around how we like organizations across the board manage their transition. So whether I think obviously some people are being a bit more taking a bit more of a hardline approach and just kind of like making people use them, AI technology and things, but others are sort of more shying away from it, as you said. But either way, I think for me personally, and I guess this is sort of a little bit selfish in the role that I do, but the most successful changes are the ones that take sort of a more human-centered approach and really actually factor in the change management. And I think you were talking about that, Carolina, with the individuals and sort of like how they each use it. So I don't think the adoption of AI or automation in the workplace is any different to sort of any other big transformation that we're thinking about. And we really do need to bring people on that journey with us. And the fear of AI is something that is very real. And I think if you take a human-centered approach and create, supportive and transparent cultures around AI adoption, that's going to help sort of hopefully reduce that fear and some of the challenges around it. On the other side, if we again put people first, and when we're thinking about how we can better equip colleagues on the journey that they're taking with AI to continuously learn and understand how it can help teams and the organization as a whole, but also people as individuals. There's so much potential within AI to use it as a tool for personal growth and development. And so we can't overlook that. I think bringing that into the conversation is super, super important. And I think, as we sort of start to see AI being used for more sort of automation and sort of helping to bring in efficiencies to the workplace, we'll start to see things sort of that are uniquely human, the uniquely human skills becoming more and more important within the workplace and within our cultures. So things like creativity, emotional intelligence, and critical thinking, all those types of things will become super, super important. And I think those will also be aided by AI as well, right? So using personal AI coaches and other tools as a way to sort of help encourage those behaviors and those skills. But ultimately, all of that can only be done if the change is managed well and led in the right way. And so I think that's like being thoughtful about how you go about it is really, really important.
If I
Yeah,
can
I've
add
heard
one
some
more
really.
point,
Sorry,
apologies.
Carrie, please.
No, I completely agree, Charlotte. And one thing I should mention as well is, like, even those companies that don't want to talk, or they are very restrictive about the way they're thinking about AI because of their own fears and data privacy and so on. I've seen this more times than I can count. Unfortunately, the employees are already using AI. The companies want it or not, in their own way, in their own different personal or non-personal engagement. So it is a conversation even about how to best practices, what's the framework, what are the guidelines. And my recommendation is always to make clear this is a clear conversation. This is something that needs to happen from both sides, both those that don't want to work, engage with it, and it's important for them to, but also those who are engaging even beyond the boundaries of the company, because they have to understand why they shouldn't be going in that direction. It's we are talking very much about the fear because we even started this conversation, but also we have to approach that there's a big spectrum of types of users here, then we have to make sure we're addressing all of them.
Noted. Okay, that's a great point. Thank you. Before we go on and sort of go into the specifics of remote, having a very distributed sort of remote and hybrid workforce, I just want to remind the audience that we are open to questions. So please do. This is a live broadcast, so we can answer your questions. So please do get your questions in. So, despite all the return to office mandates that we've about constantly over the last 12 months, remote work has become and is likely to remain an important aspect of what we might term knowledge work. I mean, I think hybrid work, which is the sort of 2 or 3 days in, 2 or 3 seems to be, really the prevailing workplace model, certainly in this industry. So, Charlotte, are you happy to hear about Ocado's policy here in terms of hybrid working and how you're making it work?
Yeah, sure. I think this is a really interesting question to think about, and especially as you say, like with all the sort of like mandates and things that are happening at the moment, they're sort of like you're constantly hearing news about it. I think it's interesting because during COVID, most of us were sort of like forced to work in a virtual world, and we just had to figure it out and make it work for us. And in the years since then, we've really had to actually focus on being more deliberate in our thinking around our virtual and our hybrid sort of work environments, and being really clear about what the purpose of each of the different spaces is for. So one of the ways that we create sort of like a sense of belonging is being really clear on what it is that we do when we come together in the office. And so for us, that's really about having a sense of connection and collaboration and learning. And as a retailer, it's really important as it enables our colleagues to connect with not only each other, but also our suppliers and our products and other businesses who are sort of an extension of who we are as an organisation. So being together in the office gives us the opportunity to properly interact with each other, but also to see who we are as an organisation sort of like brought to life through our physical spaces. And it's something that I actually value, and I think a lot of people within our organisation also value. But on the other hand, virtual working is also highly valued, and it is absolutely key for us as we are able to do sort of like a different type of work maybe at home. So that's maybe more quiet, focused work. And sort of maybe even connecting with people who we can't connect with in the business, in the office. So having the ability to work from home enables like just a different type of work, and enables us to think differently about how we do things in different spaces. Another key element of sort of hybrid working is the ability to maintain a work-life balance, and that is something that's really, really key for colleagues in terms of creating a sense of belonging, but also engagement. So keeping it's just a top priority for colleagues, and I think that came out more and more through COVID, and it has sort of stayed that way ever since, which obviously is really important. But I think whatever environment you're working in, whether that's at home or in the office or somewhere else, a key element of sort of employee engagement is strong leadership, and strong leadership that focuses on things like communication and recognition, and supporting colleagues working sort of wherever they are. And so I think I've had those conversations about technology and having the right platforms and applications so that your leaders are able to continue to do those things with their colleagues wherever they are is really important. That's like sort of, we use Slack for communication and also recognition, but having those platforms in place is actually really, really important to maintain all of the things that I've just been talking about in whatever sort of environment you're working in.
Brilliant. I mean, and I think that's the challenge, isn't it? It's how you maintain that the employee engagement, but also keep the culture and the sense of belonging alive when you may only be in 2 or 3 days a week and you're distributed around the country. And that was certainly a complaint we heard a lot about, because it has an impact on retention. Because if employees feel less tightly, I suppose, bonded to a company because they don't feel fully included in the bigger culture of the organization, they are, you're more likely to lose them, is the bottom line. I mean, Carolina, did you want to sort of come in here?
Certainly. I think there's always a place for the digital workplace and for the physical workplace. I think the one is the extension of the other. You have to be thinking about all of your team members, how they should engage with the culture, with each other, with learning, and so on, is at extent in both cases. Because also you may have people who are predominantly remote because of their own situation or because teams are supposed to be remote, but also sometimes they're going to come together because it's important for the way they're bonding, the way they're working together, the way their culture is built, the way they're learning together. I'm a firm believer that there is a place for both, and each one of them have um, stronger points in comparison to the other. I think some situations, self-learning, that since we're talking about learning development a little bit here, is a better for a person if they prefer to learn in their own pace, but sometimes they need to have that moment to engage with their colleagues and peers in learning together and discussing different ways of thinking, because we do see better results if they are working with people that are different from them, so they can understand different points of view, creating empathy and so on. So it's about understanding where the spaces and creating that opportunities for both of them to happen in synchronicity. I'm not saying they have to happen together. It's about what's the best environment for which, right? So I believe companies should not think about one or the other, but they should think in alignment. And all of that, of course, as I once again discussed, grounded in the culture and what's expected out of people. In some cases, also is perhaps per function. We do see some functions that are supposed to be more in the office because of the nature of their work, because they're supposed to be engaging with customers. Perhaps they're supposed to be in customers, and some others are supposed to be more remote. So it's about taking all of those different dimensions, perhaps variables, into consideration and create that environment that both the digital and the physical workplaces are considered as part of this entire experience for the employee.
Okay. And I mean, and how can we help employees really make the most of the sort of collaboration and communications kind of tools and applications they may have to really enable that seamless blending of the digital and physical environments?
I can start, and Charlotte, I would love to hear your perspective as well. I think you said one word that I would start with. It's enablement. It's understanding what's expected out of them, out of that, like what's the behaviors that you expect, how people would work together in each situation, creating those either opportunities in the digital platform or in the physical workplace that they are going to be able to take advantage, to use, to reverberate, disseminate across their teams, and enable them to use them and expect them and make clear that that's expected out of them. One thing Charlotte mentioned earlier that is super important for this whole new ways of working is about strong leadership, and they should not be forgotten as a focus of they are the ones creating or at least building those cultures in their teams and so on, is how to those practices, those routines, how they are also enabled to perform their jobs of recognition, of teaching, of making people collaborate with each other, regardless of the space they have available to them. So I think that's one point that I would start as to be a critical factor for the success of whatever.
It's all about the enablement.
That's a very, very important piece. It's not the only piece, but it's definitely a very important piece.
Brilliant. And actually, Charlotte, this is perfect time to come to you now for your piece, because we have had a question asking about the tone that leadership sets and its sort of criticality to the likely success of this kind of setup. So presumably that's an area that you've got some experience and opinions on.
Yeah, I mean, with this type of setup, with any kind of like change that you're working on, I think you can't understand. You can't underestimate the impact that strong leadership has. And part of that is like making sure that your leaders are really bought into whatever whatever either change you're working on, or whether it's a hybrid working environment, like whatever it is that you're doing, your leaders need to be bought into that, and they also need to be role modeling the change. So if we're talking about like communication tools, that means that leaders need to be using and championing the tools that you have. And if you're talking about like a hybrid working situation, it's they're sort of like coming into the office when they say they are, and sort of working at home when they should be. So it's them kind of being at the front of the change and really leading it. When we're thinking about collaboration tools and sort of them role modeling the use of it, it's not just sort of using it for one-way communication where sort of leaders are telling you and updating you constantly. It's actually also about sort of engaging in the conversations and really paying attention to what's happening across the organization and interacting with that, whatever that might be. So yeah, leadership is super, super important.
Brilliant. And do you have any words of advice for sort of just getting over some of the other challenges that organizations might kind of come across at this point in getting people to engage?
Yeah, I mean, it's a broad question because there's so many different challenges that like companies can can face when sort of embracing change, or asking colleagues to embrace change, and that's because change is hard, regardless of whether it's a technology change or you're moving house or whatever you're doing. It can be quite confronting for people, and so. Yeah, I think it's leaning into that a little bit and sort of understanding your people and who they are is a key thing. But I think if I'm thinking about sort of the areas that have actually enabled us to, maybe where people haven't adopted change or like a communication platform as effectively as we'd wanted to, sometimes it's actually a really simple thing. So it could be as simple as we've overlooked proper training and onboarding of the different platforms that we have, and often, the use of these tools is actually quite like, especially tools that have been sort of running for a while, that they are embedded within the way that we do things, and so we just expect that people know how to use them, and that they can just sort of pick them up. So when new joiners start, we just kind of think, oh yeah, they can use it. Or when we change a process, they just kind of think, oh yeah, people will just get on board with it. But it's not necessarily the case. And when we don't actively engage with colleagues and train them and sort of give them the support that they need to actually use them, the tools, they'll just end up confused and frustrated, and will probably either not use them or will revert back to sort of old ways of working.
It's part of the goal of living in a multi communications platform universe.
Yeah.
There's a lot of
I
there's a lot of them out there.
Yeah, and I think it's also just like technology is it's just so part of our lives now, and I think we just think that people just know how to use it and they just can adopt it and pick it up really quickly, and that's definitely not always the case. So I think when you're implementing new platforms, or making changes, especially when you're making changes to existing processes and platforms that you already have, be really mindful of the tools, um, and how they kind of interact with processes and the daily tasks of colleagues, and give them the opportunity to learn how to do that most effectively. Otherwise, they either just won't do it at all, or they'll continue to do things the way that they always have done because it's the easier way to do it. And you probably experience that, Carolina, with like lots of different customers that you work with or businesses that you work with.
Yeah, and I think Slack is particularly how can I say, a little bit of an example of what you said, because it's similarly simple to use at first. It's so intuitive, which is fantastic from a UI perspective, from a user interface. Our product team, design team did an amazing job there. But that's if you want to stay in the surface. And I think Okado is a great example of they are so mature and so advanced on the way of using Slack that new people, you mentioned very well, they perhaps come from different companies that they use different toolings, or even coming from the company that use Slack but in a different level of maturity. You get into this new world or environment that is so much more features, usage, use cases that they maybe even become overwhelmed. I remember when I started at Slack 5 years ago, I came from another company that actually uses Slack, and I was like, I thought I knew what I was doing, and it's way beyond what I expected. So my word of advice there is Slack's fantastic, but a lot of companies, they stay at the surface because that's what's in front of everyone, because that's what's easy to self enable. Let's say like this, just self-learn through exploration. But if you really want to harvest all the power, all the ROI, it's going deeper. It's doing something that Educado does, is actually embedding it as part of their processes, the way they work. So I
We
completely
will
agree, Charlotte.
we will come to ROI. Yeah. Sorry, I interrupted your flow. I apologize.
No. I was ending. I just say like it's. I completely agree with Charlotte what she said, and I think it's like a great example of what you said, Charlotte. That people assume that it's because we are working on technology or we're using day to day by ourselves that that's going to be uh, enough for people to just start using it, and especially for companies that want to go into the higher ROI level or such as Ocado, that are more mature level, that it is they need to bring the employees in that journey to get to the point that they would like them to.
Okay. We just had another question, which is excellent because I hadn't. Well, I must admit I thought of one as well. But it's following on from the earlier question, a bit more depth on what you both mean by strong leadership in this context. So, for example, you talked about senior leaders embracing change, and I assume being seen to do so. What else is the question?
Do you want me to jump in and start there? Yeah, sure. I think first of all, like a really key role that leaders play is actually setting the direction that you're wanting to travel, and sort of then also role modeling and bringing people on the journey, like I've already said, but actually them being really clear and sort of setting the direction and making sure people understand how that going back to what I said at the very start, how that connects to the purpose and sort of the direction that you're heading as an organization. So how you're actually going to use tools, or how leadership see you using these tools to achieve your purpose is really clear. And then communicating that is also very, very important because people will sort of like connect in and follow with what they say. But there are a number of different ways that sort of leadership becomes, or strong leadership becomes important when embracing and landing change. And part of that is the role that they play in recognition and storytelling as well. So I think recognizing and sort of encouraging colleagues that are embracing change themselves and are coming forward with ideas and sort of doing the right things and sort of embracing change is really, really important because that helps then to encourage other people to do the same and sort of get on board with that. And onto the storytelling piece, I think storytelling is we can't underestimate how useful that can be for talking about how we're doing things really well, and bringing to life the change and sort of showing examples of how sort of leaders are doing things, but also teams across the business are, and leaders play like a really key role in sort of like picking up on those things that are happening, and telling that story, telling those stories across the business. But also, along with storytelling comes sort of listening and taking on board feedback and adjusting. I think having a culture that embraces feedback is so important because if colleagues or if people are telling you that things aren't quite working and you need to change it, and then acting on that feedback, leaders have the ability to do that, whereas not everyone in the organization does. And so all of those things, I mean, I've just rattled off a bunch of different things there, but all of those things kind of working together is are just sort of examples of how leaders can take a really strong role in landing change and encouraging other people to embrace change as well.
Excellent. Before we do turn to the question of ROI, something that sort of popped into my head, that this is all going to be highly variable depending on the type of company you are, isn't it? If you have got, I mean, again, I'm assuming I might assume incorrectly, so Charlotte, please do tell me if I'm wrong, but I'm assuming Ocado is going to have a fairly high proportion of kind of digital natives, people that are, I suppose, more likely to be flexible with regards to sort of collaboration, communications, platforms, and tooling. In some more traditional organisations, that may not be the case. Do you think that has a bearing on how this kind of changes is managed and rolled out?
Yeah, definitely. I think, I mean, it goes back to that. Well, again, it goes back to purpose and vision, and like sort of connecting people to that, especially when you have people that are more like nervous about change or nervous about adopting technologies. And often that actually, you can have those types of people within organizations that are really innovative and sort of like fast moving. And often they're the people that have like worked there a long time, and they're just sort of like really sort of like, we know how things are done here. And part of that can actually be just working with them and understanding like at an individual level and at a team level where that resistance comes from and what's causing it. And sometimes it might be as simple as like, actually they're a little bit resistant because they're an expert in what they do right now, and they don't want to lose that feeling of being an expert. And so it's actually just sort of like working with them to sort of see how you can bring them on the journey and get them to where you need to go. But again, I think having leadership that set the direction and sort of set the tone for how you want to move with the change is super important. So thinking about having the right people in the right spaces or the right teams and leading the right initiatives can have a huge impact on sort of bringing people on the journey, but also making sure that you as an organization are focusing on the right things.
One thing,
That's
when
great.
you're dealing with such a diverse group of users, I think that's what we're talking about here, right? We're
Mm-hmm.
talking about people in different moments in their tech, like from digital maturity to types of use cases to the types of change they're going to have to incur, or even different how can I say, resistance to change, or reasons for resistance to change. One thing I do advise customers to do, or we do with them sometimes, is actually create a map, a change map. Is understanding, first of all, who are the prioritized groups of change users, let's say changing people impacted by change. How do we classify them? I know it's not great to generalize, but we have to group somehow to
Are you talking about
impact.
kind of user profiling and
It's some type of profiling, but it's much more like, for instance, it can be by okay, people who are directly impacting the center of change, and we expect them.
personas? That's the word I was looking for. Personas. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. So
Mm.
we try to somehow bringing that persona to life on what's expected out of them during this change, what kind of role they're going to play in the change, such as leaders could be a persona, right? That we're talking about here, and also what type of where they are in the journey towards change. So we can actually map out, okay, are they very distant from the to supposed to be, or are they very close? Where, what type of resistance or what type of actions should we take? That will help you also analyze, okay, where should we focus first? Should we focus first where, like the leaders, for instance, because they're going to do a more of a multiplier effect, or should we focus more first on the regulatory team because they have to negotiate with like workers council, for instance, that's a requirement for other types of changes. So that kind of mapping can help you prioritize also where you should focus first, and then what type of action should you also prioritize to execute.
Okay, that's fantastic. These great answers. Thank you very much indeed, and I hope that answers your question to the person that put that one in. So this is where it all starts to get a bit more complicated. Well, as if that wasn't complicated enough. So, I mean, Carolina, how do we even begin to kind of start to measure the ROI on kind of these comms and collaboration platforms?
That's a very, very good question. It's a tricky one as well. We're discussing a little bit of that in preparation for this webinar. There's so much discussion, so many different ways of doing so. I can tell a little bit how we do it at Slack, but also my point of view, personal point of view, a little bit on perhaps how different companies can try to do that. We do say at Slack that we are almost like the five, or you should say it, not sure if you say anymore, but at 5% of the tax expense that can actually help amplify the 80%, because it's such a place that you can integrate all the different toolings for make sure people don't need to change the way they're working or change even the interface, change context while they are in the flow of work. So that can help people to be more efficient and effective and be more aligned also to find what they need to find and do what they need to do with whom they need to do so. But that's very hard to measure. Not gonna lie. A few things such as we do see, for instance, with Slack AI, some significant improvements in once it's adopted. We see some cases there are studies of like up to 90 minutes a day, which is quite a significant number. And that, of course, you can put that in numbers versus the average salary and so on of a large worker, and then get to numbers behind it. Additionally, one way of doing that I really, really appreciate, and I do like, is when you focus on very key use cases or processes to make it a little bit more tangible. And you see the difference in the processes before and after, that can actually put a dollar or a pound sign against it. Um, there are cases where we've done some projects on Slack for sales, for instance, that we do see shorter sales cycles or lower hurdles, like to get a quote or something like that out for the customer. That actually you can have a significant uh, number against it. We've seen cases of projects that usually are delayed by months to actually be done not only on time but even lower before it's supposed to be ending. So I would advise customers that are wanting to put a number behind it. Of course, there is a generalization piece, but also there. I think if you want to go deeper and good, very good nuggets of goodness, is also looking for those use cases that are impactful, that are actually making the change and make the difference, and talk to the teams that are actually using them quite extensively.
Thank you very much.
I could just add one thing as well, because I think obviously, like the benefits that you kind of gain or the return on investment is going to be very different depending on different organizations, and like what they're trying to achieve through like these different changes. For us specifically, like we're quite like we were talking about before, we use Slack really well. It's embedded within our organization, and so we're not necessarily we don't necessarily look at the things that you were just kind of talking about, Carolina, because we're a little bit further along in the journey now. But one of the things that I look at in my role is obviously engagement, and how the tools have an impact on colleague engagement, and specifically with our communication tools, that's looking at how communication as a driver of engagement is sort of impacted by the tools that we have. And for us, generally, communication remains one of the highest scoring areas. And for the most part, I think that's because colleagues feel like they're able to connect with our organization and our strategy and our business priorities through the communication that we're doing through the different platforms that we use, because they're so easy. It's easy to gain information to them, and so you can work asynchronously, so you're kind of getting it at the time that's right for you. And so I think like that return on investment will look, as I said, very different to different people, and sort of for me anyway, personally, and the work that I do, one of the ways that I look at like how beneficial these things are is on the impact that they have on colleague engagement. So it's just a different way of looking at it.
No, that's a really interesting way of looking at it. And it also brings me very neatly to my next point that I wanted to discuss, which is so you've talked about the impact for Ocado on engagement, because what I wanted to talk about was ways that you could potentially utilize tools like Slack to you're going to struggle with the diversity, but I'm just thinking about the inclusion piece. It's about making sure that everyone feels heard, which is the essence of inclusion, isn't it? I mean, do you have any kind of any further ideas around how these platforms can help there, especially if that's the way that you measure the ROI on them?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think it's especially important, a question to ask now at a time where lots of people are like kind of moving away from actively engaging in conversations or doing work around diversity and inclusion.
Hasn't it? But we do.
Yeah,
Lots of organisations are just still quietly doing the work. They're just sort of not making a big brouhaha about it.
exactly, and I think part of that is like it actually seems very simple, but part of sort of making sure that you've got like inclusive workplaces and the tools that you use are inclusive is actually making an active decision to make it part of the conversations and make it part of your practices within your workplace. So if we kind of link back to hybrid working and sort of people coming into the office and how we engage with each other, but also the spaces that we have, one of the things that we've done a lot of work is an area that we've done a lot of work is making sure that our people policies are really sort of like aligned to like what our people actually need and want, and so that's making sure that they're as inclusive as possible. And so that could be things like just like using inclusive language in the communication that we do in the policies, but it also could go so far as saying, providing paid time off for people who are carers, and sort of making sure that the way that we use tools and our policies are inclusive. But outside of that space, I think some of the practices and the things that we've done with how we use our space and the technology that we have is, when you're in the office creating spaces for people who need sort of like quiet focused, an area for quiet focused work, they can go there and sort of like do that quiet focused work, because there's technology and there's workstations and things set up for people away from like their normal working teams, where they can kind of get into the work that they need to do without being interrupted. And for some people, that's actually really, really important. It's a small thing, but it can have a massive impact. And it's not even necessarily using technology or these platforms; it's just creating space. But when we do think specifically about the tools and the collaboration platforms that we have, I think one of the things that organizations need to be thinking about when you're looking into implementing new tools is looking at systems that provide colleagues with accessibility features. Slack does that. So Slack has things like screen readers, and like you can change the color of the background of your Slack to make it easier to read if you need to. There's loads of different features that Slack has that enables people to work effectively no matter what their situation is. And similarly, using tools like Slack and communication platforms that enable people to work asynchronously is also really important for inclusion, because it means, if someone has to leave early to go pick up their kids from school, or go to a doctor's appointment, or look after someone in their family who they take on a caring role for, they can come back and get the communication that they have or get up to speed pretty quickly, because the tools enable them to do that. And so I think it's going back to what I said at the start, it's being really just keeping that in mind, keeping inclusion in mind when you're making decisions around like the types of tools that you use, but not only that, like your policies and the different sort of ways of working within your organization.
Super, thank you very much indeed. So moving on to a slightly more finishing on a slightly more technical ending, really, how can the integration of other applications into this kind of tooling help business work, workflow, decision making, that sort of thing? How does that? And Carolina, you can, if you could sort of take the lead here and just explain how businesses can really make that work for them.
Sure. This can be very big, but I'm going to try to be a little bit more succinct here.
Yeah, we haven't got huge amounts of time.
I think the point to start with, it's important for the company to understand what's their governance and framework of what's their tech stack supposed to be governed. That's one piece that is important to start, because they should have some kind of rules and guidelines, policies, and so on what kind of tools they make available, what people are supposed to be using to make their work better or more productive on the way they're doing things. And then Slack or whatever collaboration tool or communication tool they're using should be part of that. Companies such as platforms such as Slack, the good thing is that you're able to integrate what is part of your tech stack into the platform. But I would go beyond that. I would start looking to things such as a process. Example, we did a project with a bank about their deployment processes, and they were using over 10 different toolings for that process. And that was very confusing and very wasteful, and they have to go here and there and everywhere to actually find information to get a conclusion of should we deploy into production or not this code. And we brought everything to Slack. They could see everything as a single dashboard as part of automation that we created for them, and that the process about who should be able to provide that information to, who should make decisions, and so on, was much more streamlined and easy to see. That's one example. There are many, many others of the tools as part of like making sure that you understand what they're supposed to be doing as part of this process, and how can perhaps a platform or that people are working on the day-to-day to orchestrate that. But is also to be governed by this architectural governance that should be an overseeing of how companies see that they are governing their tech stack. So the way that you're integrating things should be almost like an outcome of everything that you're done before.
Oh, an outcome, right? So I've got you. Yeah.
Yeah, an outcome. So
essentially look at the process and the objective rather than the application.
correct. Application should be an outcome, right? You should use application for something. And then, of course, the way you're integrating that as part of the process should be how the users are actually going to be interacting with that process, and then integration being part of that process.
And this will also help with questions of data integrity and data security.
That's a great point. I've seen this so many times about where should the data live? Should data live here, there, everywhere? And I think that conversation happens a bit too late in the game. Sometimes.
So often, security is concerned.
Yeah, is it because they put so many different toolings, which are fantastic toolings together, and each one of them has some level of overlap. And then where is the system of record? Where is the system of process? There are different roles that each one could take, again, depending on what you're supposed to be achieving, right? There must be again, I'm going to be repeating myself a little bit here, but there must be a framework for data security and data integrity. There must be, of course, understanding each also either like where a company is based is should be a regiment of what kind of regulatory framework they're going to be also be obliging to, compliant to, and that should be one of the inputs to inform how this framework should be built. To, okay, what should be the system of record? Where should this data live? This data should live, for instance, in Europe because we're part of this specific regulation, or should it live somewhere else because the companies are nowadays global, right? Or the data.
The whole kind of repatriation seems to be very much a trend that's well underway at the moment.
Exactly, and then even how it's processed across the different there are so many different components to it. How the API protocols and so many different toolings. So there are a lot of different components that must be thought. But I would say take a step back first, understanding where you are, what's your kind of compliance, what's the regulatory framework you have to oblige to, and then put that framework in place, and then understand within that framework which companies or which applications you need to have, and how the data flow from one to the next, and where it's going to live. And it's important to think about that. I think it's especially important nowadays with the whole AI LLMs, where LLMs live, are the large language models actually being trained by the data you're providing or not. All of these are very important different items or considerations that have to happen, and conversations that have to happen with the different providers to understand, okay, where's the best place for our data to live? Where's the best place for our data not to live? How is the processing going to take place? What are the guardrails and boundaries of, okay, AI is fine as long as it's not training the data for the LLM, for instance. It's an example, but there are so many things that should be considered, but important to take that step back, and then the applications are onboarded into that framework that you already thought for your industry or for your company.
Okay. Well, I think that is sort of bringing us towards the end of our session today. There is still a question or two, but we're getting rather low on time. Thank you, Carolina and Charlotte, for your thoughts and insight today. Great deal. Just some notes I've taken. If you want to reduce the gap between the technology and culture, don't make assumptions. Make sure you think about the storytelling, embrace feedback, create change maps, and look at processes and outcomes rather than the tools themselves. So thank you again, both. So a fascinating session. Any unanswered questions we will be passing on to Carolina and Charlotte for them to pick up with you offline. So thanks again to both of you, and thank you to our audience for your engagement and your questions. And we hope to see you all again soon.